look to your left, look to your right. At least two of you are probably going to have some kind of sleep disturbance.
That's tough. It's not something that we tend to talk about very much.
In some ways, video games are a neurodiverse friendly learning space.
It sounds impossible. It sounds like a paradox, but I promise you can do it.
Welcome to this week's research recap. Today we have two really interesting papers, really interesting topics, something that I think if you don't struggle with one, you definitely struggle with the other. So we can all learn from this. We've got one paper looking at sleep disruption in ADHD, and then the other one looking at the new term, hasn't been set up in the DSM yet, but there's indications it's coming, which is internet gaming disorder and ADHD as well. So do you struggle with these things? Do you know somebody who does? What should you do? That's what we're going to be covering in today's recap. So the first paper is the British Journal on Psychiatry, and that is basically looking at the management of sleep disorders in autism with co-occurring ADHD, and it's an update specifically written for clinicians. And basically what they wanted to do is they wanted to do a literature review of how sleep conditions are assessed and treated among people who have comorbid ADHD and ASD. They primarily focused on children through to young adults, probably because that's where you see a lot of those issues, at least initially. And then they also, we're going to focus more on the ADHD component, but just to let you know, this paper also looked at ASD as well. So how did they do it, Sarah?
This paper sort of said they decided not to do a systematic literature review, which means they sort of just searched some keywords in a bunch of different places. You know, they listed like Google Scholar and PubMed and just a bunch of different places. They listed their sort of search terms, and in order to be included, they had to talk about sleep difficulties among people with ADHD and ASD. And again, children primarily. So that was interesting. Usually we see systematic reviews, but in terms of what they found, I think it kind of makes up for it. It seems pretty comprehensive. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it was good. I think for whatever reason, they decided that they were, what is the term they used? Let me find it. It was a great term for those of you who are looking at how to get out of something. They said they've deviated from the requirement, which I love. So they weren't doing the full, setting it up, following the guidelines, registering it on Prospero, which is what you do if you're doing a systematic review. It might have been that they ran out of time. There's all kinds of different reasons why people might make that decision. But at the end of the day, they did go in depth in terms of the different struggles that you can have with ADHD, and that was really interesting as well. So, Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about the kinds of results they had? I mean, in terms of the, how many people struggled, and then what did they particularly struggle with? Because I think it's interesting to know there's a huge breadth of sleep disorders. It's not just, I'm struggling to sleep exactly.
Yeah, we're definitely going to scope this so that it's super helpful. So first, I think the most important finding in this whole entire 10-page paper is that approximately 50 to 85% of children with ADHD or ASD have documented sleep disturbances. So amongst sort of all of the different studies that they looked at, all of the papers that they reviewed, that was what the literature currently says. Similar studies on the controls, so the neurotypical children, puts them at 16.7% have sleep issues compared to 50 to 85% of neurodivergent. So that's stark.
It's a lot. It's 50 to 85% is, well, first of all, that's quite a broad amount.
Sure.
It's about 50% of of the thing, but it is. It indicates that, if you have a child with ADHD or you were a child with ADHD, look to your left, look to your right. At least two of you are probably going to have some kind of sleep disturbance.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they go on to say that some of these sleep disturbances are things like bedtime resistance, difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep, irregular sleep-wake cycles, restless
Yeah.
sleep, and parasomnias, which are things like talking in your sleep or walking in your sleep, sort of like sleep movements. Yeah. Sort of moving about in our sleep, waking up feeling like not well rested. Those are all sort of things that are really common in the ADHD experience.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever had any of these experiences, Sarah?
Absolutely. I definitely remember being a kid and sort of just lying awake in bed at night, like staring at the walls and stuff. And you know what? My oldest son right now, actually both of them, but the baby is excused. But yeah, I mean, sleep issues were one of the first indications that my son had ADHD. And this study also, corroborates that.
Indicates that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember as a child, I sleepwalked. I had a bit of an issue with that. I remember that I woke up next to the front door a couple of times.
You know what? Actually, now that you say that, my mom tells me stories about how when I was a kid, I used to go downstairs and turn on all the lights and unlock all the doors and go outside in the middle of the night. So yeah, that is wild. Actually, I totally forgot that until you unlocked it just now.
Yeah. Core memory unlocked. Yeah, no, it's it is interesting. And nowadays I've never struggled with restless leg syndrome per se, but I definitely have had on and off, I know what it is like to experience that. And I know for people who have that, even though it might not count to a lot of people as like a sleep disorder, it is a big sleep struggle. So I think the first thing to do and the first benefit of this paper is just to take a look at your life and go, do I struggle with sleep in some way? I mean, I know I'm tired, but do I have something? Because you might and not even know that you have, because we don't always talk about anything except insomnia. Sarah, you look terrified.
Well, it is terrifying because there's even so much more. Like there's insomnia, then there's sleep apnea, and then I've had clients, a client that had narcolepsy. Yeah, I mean these very real things that just totally can take you out.
Yeah, exactly. So what else did they find?
Yeah. So they also found things like higher anxiety levels were sort of common amongst these people as well.
In terms of exacerbating potential sleep issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because that's also an underpinning of sort of restless leg as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the other really interesting thing was they did indicate that, and we'll have to have Abby back on to talk about this in terms of genetics specifically, but they indicated that there might be some kind of underlying genetic factor that could be linking the parts of the brain that struggle with sleep or help you regulate a healthy sleep cycle with also neurobiological conditions such as ADHD and ASD.
Yeah, definitely. Many factors actually, they saw abnormalities in the melatonin system and, the part of the brain that helps to regulate the circadian rhythm. And they sort of were talking about how poor sleep over a period of time, so sleep deprivation or sleep debt over time is going to decrease your executive functioning abilities because of some increased activity in some other brain region. There's just so much going on in our brain that could potentially impact our sleep.
Yeah, exactly. It's this idea of, it might be, I think we talked about it as like a cloud, neurodiversity might be a cloud and not a diagnosis. And so there may be this kind of sort of area of the brain that is different, that is impacting all of these different things. And that's why everyone's sort of saying how can this be linked to this and linked to this? When you look at the brain, which is essentially a large cloud in itself, it makes sense there might be sort of regions that are all being affected and all connected to other regions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I got a little bit distracted for a second because I was thinking about like, why do we say to sleep on a cloud? Like clouds are water and stuff. So it's not even like,
I want to know why we say sleep like a baby. Because
oh my gosh. Yeah. That's another awful one.
Because I have a baby and I do not recommend sleeping like a baby.
Yeah. I mean, like when he's sleeping, it's so cute because he's just knocked out, but very volatile.
Yeah. And, it takes a lot to get them down. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of, it's hard to get your children down. The main takeaway here really is that if your child is suffering from some kind of sleep difficulty and they have an ADHD or an ASD or suspecting diagnoses, they should be screened for both ADHD and ASD.
Yeah, which I think kind of comes back to that idea of like, do we have enough of a intercorrelated screening process? And the answer is no.
What does the future of diagnostics look like? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how can we make this part of routine screenings?
Exactly, yeah.
We know that ADHD can feel overwhelming and frustrating, and that's on a good day. And we don't want anyone to have to navigate that alone.
That's why we created the ADHD Academy, where adults with ADHD can meet, join, share stories, and support each other in a judgment-free way. If you want to connect with others who truly understand you and learn research-based strategies to help you feel more in control and build momentum in your life and work, you found the right place.
Together, let's transform your ADHD challenges into strengths. If you'd like to know more, you can click the link below to join us in the ADHD Academy.
Hope to see you there. Okay, well, should we jump over to the second paper?
Definitely, let's do that. This one's really interesting.
So the next paper was a brief comprehensive review. Brief is accurate. It was so brief, we'll talk about that, of the interactions between ADHD and internet gaming disorder. This was from the International Journal of Mental Health and Addiction. So specifically a journal related to addiction, which I think really comes through in how they discussed the idea of people with ADHD, having this potential disorder. And what they wanted to know is just, what does the research say about the relationship between ADHD and internet gaming disorder? The research being academic research. There's a lot of newspaper articles about this. They did not look at those as far as I'm aware. So they were looking at academic research on this topic. So how did they do it, Sarah?
Well, you know what, Sky, I would love to tell you, but unfortunately, they didn't tell us. I scoured this paper for a methodology section. I went to the web link, the DOI, and it wasn't there either. Sort of restricted access, but still. Yeah, I don't think a methodology exists for this paper. It seems they have deviated from the requirement as well.
Definitely going to use that at least sometimes.
That's the episode.
Yeah. They chose to deviate from the requirement as well. They said they were doing a non-systematic literature review of 19 major studies. So we know they looked at 19 studies, and we know they did it non-systematically. That's kind of so maybe they did look at newspaper articles. I mean, at this point, we're left to wonder.
Yeah, I mean, they do have a references section. So they did choose to stick to that convention. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have been published. I'm just making fun at this point. I'm sorry for whoever wrote this paper. But yeah, I mean, again, this is another one that really digs into what they found. Because again, this is a literature review. The methodology really isn't that important, I guess.
Yeah, they clearly felt so.
They look for papers and they tell us what they find. So that was really cool. And they organized that really well also, I'm just going to say.
So what did they find?
Well, I think, again, the mic drop here is that 51.5% of the sample in all of the papers with ADHD meet criteria also for internet gaming disorder, which they just abbreviate as IGD.
I want to just take a minute here and say, met criteria for internet gaming disorder. They didn't meet the criteria for liking games. And it's important to meet the distinction here, because if you think about 50% of people with ADHD, you're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like people like to video game that, but it's the internet gaming disorder part, the part where it's according to this section, and we'll talk about this in a second, the idea that it is negatively impacting your life in some way.
That's interesting, actually. That prompted me to go to look up the criteria, actually.
It is testament to how long we've been doing this that I knew you were doing that. I could just see that that's what you were doing. I didn't even have to say anything.
Yeah. So according to the DSM-5, internet gaming disorder is indicated by at least 5 core symptoms out of 9 over 1 year. So it's things like preoccupation with video games, experiencing unpleasant symptoms when playing, the need to spend an increased amount of time, failed attempts to control participation, losing interest in other hobbies, deceiving family. Yeah, it's just other sort of social and economic impacts, So again, when Sky says like pervasive problem, we're talking about like a real problem. You are, this is way out of your control, and it's impacting you on multiple sort of sectors here. So that's sad.
Quite a lot.
And if that's you, reach out for support. I'm sure that there are so many supports.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is in the DSM, so the same sort of supports as you get in general. Finding a therapist, finding someone who can help with this is important. And this might be,
absolutely,
for those of you who didn't know that you had a sleeping issue, you might now think you might maybe have an internet gaming issue. So we're just out here. You're welcome. You're welcome, everybody.
No. So the rule of Psych 101 is that you're not allowed to diagnose yourself.
No.
Although, you know what, it's 2024 and we're sort of doing different things now. So I don't know. Anyway, take that with a grain of salt.
Us now.
But exactly. Well, you know what? Self-diagnosis is valid when it is held over our heads. Like, do you deserve a good quality of life carrot? Like, anyway, sorry. We're talking about this paper and internet gaming disorder and how there are overlaps between that and ADHD, like common ADHD symptomology.
Yes.
Like,
so do you want to take us through the 3 aspects specifically that seem to be connected?
Absolutely. So impulsivity is a main one that's associated with both, sort of low self-esteem and challenges with decision-making is also a core feature of both. It can also be like further reinforced because the gaming will be sometimes used as a coping mechanism for the emotions, which can lead to sort of social withdrawal and things, which we'll talk about later, which will also impact the last one, which is emotional dysregulation. Sort of as you begin to withdraw, that has consequences. Emotional dysregulation is also a core feature of both in this case as well. So yeah,
it's really difficult, and I will say I play video games not as much as I used to, mostly because I can't find any good ones right now. Make of that what you will, but at least for me. And so the idea of video games being appealing for ADHD brains, I think, is not new. One of the reasons that they indicate it might be appealing is because of the reward system. So, gaming can be fun. It can be exciting. Somebody has spent hours of time trying to figure out a way to help you do something in a way that is fun and engaging and full of dopamine and working memory supports. In some ways, video games are a neurodiverse friendly learning space compared to the much more loose, unfocused, unsupportive, trying to figure out how to live life space, which is much more neurotypically supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this paper talks about it in terms of like, why are the games appealing to an ADHD person? And, really it just comes down to the fact that they've observed, like, while you play video games, your brain is releasing dopamine. And we like that. It helps us.
We're fans.
It sort of stimulates us to action. And so you combine that with like hyper focus and time blindness and poof, you're done. Like your day's gone.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. I think it's interesting because, they talk a little bit here about the downsides of too much gaming. Also the fact that not everyone with ADHD is the same. Not everyone struggles with video games. But I think the piece that they don't really talk about a little bit is whether we should consider, and other people have talked about this, gamification is a real concept, but whether it's worth considering, if you do struggle with video games, what your life looks like right now and what it is about the video games that you enjoy. And, on some level, video games are also just about learning and growing and developing, or they can be, as well as those more addictive qualities.
Yeah. What need is that meeting for you?
Yeah. Do you need to maybe find a way to make the work that you're doing a bit more sort of video game-esque? And I say that as somebody who does do that. I'm working on a really big project right now, like a 5-month-long project, and I spent a lot of time planning out, what my day is going to look like and my sort of like sub goals and rewards for those goals and all those kinds of things, and then accountability and other things, so there's a bit of a leaderboard, if you will, to try and make it feel less vague and just free floating. And this isn't to say, obviously, if you have an addiction, it's important to get support for that. But if you're somebody who is more on the, I play video games, I'm not sure if I want to as much as I do, but it doesn't feel like a full-blown issue, then that might be something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what Sky said, what does your life look like? Sort of, do you have something, a space where you are able to grow, something where you're able to get things done in a sort of enjoyable way, or are you sort of on the struggle bus?
Yeah. Yeah. Or doing a repetitive task.
Repetitive task. Yeah.
Oh, that feeling of going to work, and I don't do that now. I feel so lucky to do what we do. But, that feeling when you go to work and you're doing something that you don't really understand, that you don't think anyone else cares about, that isn't helping you grow, that isn't helping you get anywhere, that's really tough.
There's no intrinsic motivation there. It's purely like a financial transaction. That just doesn't spark joy.
If it was a game, chances are you wouldn't play it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the way you phrased it when we were having our pre-recording chat was better. And so I'm going to go back to that just because
go for it.
You also brought up like sociological conditions that might be associated with like wanting to escape in games, if you're sort of stuck in that dead end job, or maybe you don't have a job, or maybe you sort of don't enjoy the social company that, of the people that you live with. And so you'd like to withdraw in some way or dissociate from, the overwhelm of life as it is. That's tough. It's not something that we tend to talk about very much. I would love it if anyone who's listening knows of a sort of concept in psychology or therapy, maybe somebody who wants to help me create a new discipline, sort of a psychology, sociology fusion going on, because I don't think anybody else is doing it. It's real, people. You can't solve sociological problems with like breath work.
Yeah. It does come into it.
You can tolerate it better.
Yeah.
Breath work helps you tolerate it better. But
yeah. Which is a lot coming from Sarah, because for those of you who listen, Sarah talks about mindfulness all the time. But I think you're completely right. And I think, first of all, I'm guessing you're going to get a bunch of emails. So I'm excited for all those.
I hope
people
so.
Who know there's a combined, because I'm sure there is what you're talking about. But I think the interesting thing is, and what they kind of touch on here a little bit is, we are, with ADHD, dopamine seeking people. We are. And so this is often what I talk about with clients, is that dopamine with ADHD, we don't get enough of it. And we talk about it a lot because it is a necessity when you have ADHD. It's not a nice to have. And so if you have a life where dopamine is seen as a nice to have, where stimulation and fun and engagement is a nice to have, you will often find yourself scrolling or playing video games or something like that to support that lifestyle. And so when we say, do something you enjoy, do something that makes you happy, figure out a way to incorporate that into your life, it's because you will find a way to get it somehow when it comes to ADHD, because we need it because of the way our brains are wired. And I think that's a really important piece of context that is missing from this paper a little bit.
Yeah, they sort of talk about like imaging studies that were showing that the repeated activation of the dopamine pathway might have like consequences when doing other types of activities. But like they never talk about why someone might choose to game over other activities. So yeah, it's just like a total, I don't know. It's probably one of those like shared experience things that's so obvious to us.
Well, that's why we do this. This is why we read this research with ADHD brains, because a lot of the times it is the piece missing from this conversation. Like, this is the Journal of Addiction. They are looking at addictions. Internet gaming disorder is a possible, about to become part of a new DSM addiction. And they want to look at it with ADHD because most people, that's the most highly correlated thing. They're not necessarily looking at why and more in depth about what this means for people like us who have ADHD.
Maybe someday. We just need to join those rooms, keep breaking down the walls.
Oh yeah. We're gonna make a paper. That's my long-term goal. That's my long-term goal for this. Awesome. So is there anything else we wanted to just talk about in terms of the practical implications of this paper?
You know what? I think I'm just going to end with my little piece here with this interesting quote. They're sort of talking about how video games can provide that sensory stimulation and sort of sense of engagement in a way that like we don't have to think about it. We just have to play the game. And so that just like pushes all, like that just ticks all the right boxes for us. The sensory stimulation, the sort of dopamine release, sort of something enjoyable, flashy colors. I don't know.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's just like everything about us like really enjoys this. And so like if you do enjoy playing games, like don't let papers like this stop you from enjoying your games. Just make sure it's not the only thing in your life that you enjoy, I think.
Yeah. And see if you can bring the things you love from your favorite games into this. And I would also say, and this is specifically because I play a lot of games, is there maybe a version of a game that you would appreciate that would be better for you? Because some games are that short, quick dopamine hit that doesn't necessarily build anything else, whereas other games can be a bit more drawn out, a bit more enjoyable in a more sustainable way. So it's not just about games, it's also about like the kinds of games you play. So, that might be worth considering as well.
Games where you run out of energy are by far my favorite. That has a defined endpoint. I used to be really frustrated by them, but now I see it as like the good side of the coin. Yeah.
Games where you're learning something, games that help you learn how to set up routines in a way that maybe fits into your actual life, things like that. They can be cozy games. So kind of thinking about that as well as you go through it.
But also, like, if you're having a hard time sort of doing a chore, then maybe like pretending that you're a sim, sort of, or an NPC or something like that. And so just like doing things in a ridiculous fashion might be novel enough to trigger that initiation. So that's sort of another way that you could interpret gamification in your sort of everyday life.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us to what we're going to talk about at the end here, which is the ADHD skills, which is a cool new section, I think, Sarah, where we talk about like little, like particularly some strategies that sort of tie these papers together.
Yeah, we always try to highlight the skills, but now we're just going to be like really more intentional about it and sort of just summarize everything that we've discussed at the end. And sort of to that end, what are the things that tie together sleep difficulties and internet gaming disorder? Drum roll. It's
healthy lifestyles.
It's routines.
It's routines. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. I'm thinking about that Scooby-Doo mask right now.
Yeah, it's all
sorry,
about
guys.
your morning routine. But yeah, it is. I mean, this is kind of, what you do with your life impacts your life. I know it sounds terrible, but that's kind of how it is. So, when it comes to sleep disorders, it's, even if you do struggle with sleep disorders, it might be a matter of thinking about your evening routine, thinking about environmental factors. I mean, when it comes to clients as well, I often like to give them a sleep disorder routine. I've done that before with clients who struggle, make it a little bit less. Sometimes when we struggle to sleep or we have issues, it can be nice to kind of make a process out of it that is a bit more enjoyable, even though it's difficult, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sort of adding in more transition steps to get them ready, sort of the winding down process,
The winding down,
I'm here
but
for
also
it.
if you struggle to sleep, thinking about, okay, well, if I need to get up, I'm going to get up and I'm going to have like a little mini day in the middle of the night. I've had clients who do that. They get up and they do a little they do some dopamine, they do some movement, they eat some food that they feel is good for the middle of the night, and then they put themselves back to bed. So, and I think this kind of ties into this idea of gaming versus not gaming as well, just trying to make your life less of a vague, overwhelming mess, basically.
Just make some decisions for yourself beforehand.
Yeah.
I'm very much thinking about an interview you did with someone recently I just listened to, where you guys were talking about habit stacking. And it was Connor. And you just sort of pick one thing that you do every day. Like we all have them, regardless. You might think you have 0 routines, okay? But I promise you will find at least 3 things that you do every single day.
Yeah, I think with Connor, we were like, you get up at some point.
Exactly.
You exist in the day.
You go to the bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
You might enter through a doorway. Like entering through your doorway could be that trigger point. Like we all do things. And it's just about recognizing that, giving ourselves credit for those things, even if they're not like what we want, our ideals, whatever.
Yeah.
But you're still doing it. And we're just going to build off of it. And keep going.
Building off of it is great. And, if you are looking for more particular strategies on these, morning routines, evening routines, check out our articles on the website. We have a lot of stuff about routines and ADHD routines. And it is important, I think, to build something that is flexible and structured and fun.
It sounds impossible. It sounds like a paradox, but I promise you can do it.
Yeah, we do it all the time with many, many people. Exactly. Yeah. And, when I say that, flexible and fun, but also a bit of structure, I'm like, it's a little bit like a video game.
Oh my goodness. Oh, you're right.
So, yeah. It is actually. That's so funny.
And you know what? There's a lot of those apps out there that actually try to do that for us, right? They're like sort of a mix between the to-do list and the video game. So you know what? For pretty much every like need that you might have, there's a tool out there for you if that's what you think you need.
Definitely. Although I will say before you jump down the rabbit hole of different tools, it is good to stop and think, okay, what am I trying to get out of these different? You don't want to over-engineer the problem. Sometimes we can find ourselves kind of I've tried Habitica and things like that, and like it was good, but it wasn't simplistic enough or flexible enough for what I needed. So it can be a bit tricky to find that balance for sure. If you are somebody who is listening, or if you wanted to talk to some of our audience who are like, cool, you talked about routines, you talked about flexibility and all of these things. I want to do a routine, but like, what's the first thing? Like, what's the first step? What would you recommend?
You always have to start with looking at what you're doing right now, I think. Again, just a call out to like, what are those anchor points in your life? Like, where is there room for improvement? Like, what are you doing right now? Because you know what? Like, as simple as it sounds, sometimes we don't know what we're doing. We're just doing. And so, it's really just a shout out to like some checkpoints. What are you doing?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think figuring out what you're doing right now.
And what do you want?
And then, what you want. And then I would say putting something fun before what you want and putting something more difficult before what you don't want is probably a good starting point.
Always an advocate for starting with the fun thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps to just like slingshot you.
Exactly. Starting with the fun thing, or if you find, some things are too fun and you get distracted, maybe starting with some kind of fun, like quick thing. Sometimes people like to start work by reading an article or having a cup of tea or something like that. Like that's always going to be good.
Something that's not going to lead to more tasks.
Exactly. I mean, I've personally found myself recently trying to get up in the morning quite early, working with the US, and I find that I get up and I put on a YouTube vlogger. I'm watching Casey Neistat right now, and just having that little bit of dopamine in the morning can kind of give me the motivation to get up and go. And if I didn't do that, if I was like, I just have to get up at this hour, I probably wouldn't be getting up as early as I am right now.
I don't know how you do it. And yeah, so you know what? You say it's the finding the right dopamine, and I believe you.
Yeah. It's gamification. Mm-hmm. It's gamification on some level. Awesome. Okay.
Amazing.
So lots of different skills, and hopefully you learned a little bit today about these two areas. Definitely reach out to us if you struggle with any of these things, if you have any thoughts, if you want to start a new research area or come up with a new name with Sarah, email us. You can always reach out to us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD Lab next week.